Welcome to the latest installment of the Sharp Best Ball Show. I'm your host, Todd Burrows at Best Ball NFL, and our show today is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy and the biggest fantasy football tournament of all time, Best Ball Mania 4. Don't know what Best Ball is? It's simple. You just enter Best Ball Mania on Underdog's slick mobile app, draft your team, and that's it. Yep, it's set and forget it as Underdog optimizes your lineup weekly to create the highest scoring lineup available. It's here. It's Best Ball Mania 4, and it's your shot at a first place prize of $3 million. My, how Best Ball has grown. Get signed up on UnderdogFantasy.com or via the app store with promo code SHARPKIT. And not only will they double your first deposit up to $100, but you'll also receive the Sharp Football Draft Kit for just $1. That includes over 40 exclusive fantasy football articles, which will help your chances at winning the $3 million prize. That's Underdog Fantasy promo code SHARPKIT. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in the state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. In New York, call 1-8778-HOPE-NY. In Tennessee, call 1-800-889-9789. Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. In New York, call 1-8778-HOPE-NY. In Tennessee, call 1-800-889-9789. Today, my guest is my old friend wearing the Nirvana shirt. So you could say it's hello, 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 Hilo. Hi, Hilo.
What's up, man? That was a good one. What was that number to the helpline for?
Yeah,
Arizona
the helpline.
again?
I think you're past that. If your wife hasn't killed you yet for all your contests, and but Mark and I used to partner on a show for 1 week season. Hilo still works with 1 week season. He has exclusive best ball content of his own that you can check out. He also is writing articles for 33rd Team along with Josh Larkey. He is also doing funerals for military veterans and probably 2 or 3 other jobs that I'm unaware of. The hardest working man in the business, Mark Garcia. Mark, always a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, man. Yeah, gosh, you make me sound like a true degen over there. No, I do. I juggle a lot because I left active duty military so that I could be home with my family, and juggling all these different things allows me to basically work from home. I'm also a realtor on the side, but that's
I knew I forgot something.
No, dude,
I forgot one of your 11 jobs.
Yeah, it's just a way to be home with my kids, man. And that's kind of what it was all about.
You're never gonna get me to say a bad word about that. And you've got what, 14 of them now?
At least, yeah. We can field at least a baseball team, working on a soccer team. No, we've got 5, dude.
5.
Yeah,
including my favorite, Ben.
Yeah, Benjamin is dude. He's on his way. He's almost 3 now, man. It's crazy.
I'll never forget that time I spoke to him in the car and he stopped crying.
Yeah, we used to have to. He wouldn't nap in the house, so I would have to take him in the car, and we used to do our weekly calls, and I'd be in the car with Ben.
Yep. All right. So you know what would really help if I pulled up? There it is. Okay. It's always good when you get the right questions in front of you.
The show sheet? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So, Mark, we're going to do this podcast about Draftkings. I've been honest that I did way more drafts on Underdog than anywhere else. I spend more money on FFPC because of the $125 per entry. And I hadn't played DraftKings because I didn't mix it up. I feel like they've done some really interesting things, including having a $10 millie that, allows you to max out and try all these things that we love working on for 1,500, and then they give you a credit. So, I felt like I need to take this on as a best ball guy. So even though, most of our content here is going to be about Underdog and all the great contests over there, I thought I would bring in someone who did play a lot on DraftKings in the past, and we would have a discussion about how it differs. Mark, let's just start with, how do you think about DK differently when you're starting the draft? Explain some of the big differences and how you come into the draft thinking.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to start before you actually enter a draft room and kind of talk about how I handle juggling all these different contests and when do I start entering them, because it is a lot if you're maxing out the 3 or 4 major contests that are out every year. And
so you're saying they're like jobs.
Yeah. It's for like, and in the past I hadn't leveraged slow drafts. So I was fast drafting all 500 plus best ball. This year I'm leveraging slow drafts a little bit heavier. But when you're talking about like, how do you approach these different platforms? One of the major components that you have to put into your decision-making matrix before you even start entering contests is where's the expected value? And the primary contributor to expected value for all of these contests that run a playoff format, so leaving out drafters, the highest contribution to expected value is in week 17. That said, one of the major differences between DraftKings Millionaire Maker and the Best Ball Mania, which they're the flagship contest for each of those platforms, is the payout structure itself. You talk about like a min cash or advancing out of your round on Underdog, and you're barely making your money back for that entry. So that is a very low contribution to expected value. Over on DraftKings, you make time and a half the buy-in. So you get back, or I believe actually it's $20, or is it? No, it's 15. So you make time and a half back on your entry. Whereas on Underdog, you're getting basically your money back for a min cash, and that's advancing out of your draft.
Yeah, and that means if you're really good at this and get a 30%, a 30% pass through, that means that after the first round, you've only made back about 35% of your entry fee, where on DraftKings, you're closer to 50% is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So that is an expected value is, I think, misunderstood by a lot of people that don't have like a statistical background or that came up in poker. Expected value is the value that you can expect to extract per entry if you could simulate this contest infinite. We can't do that. We have the sample size of 1. So actual value is going to be very different from expected value. But we can only base our decisions off of expected value because we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see in the future, and we can only tailor our decision-making process to expected value and then hope to realize that through actual value. So we start off with a higher baseline on DraftKings. So that places an additional emphasis.
Now, to be fair, Underdog this year has, 1/3 of its money in regular season prizes, and you could say that's where a lot of that came from, right?
Yeah, and they couldn't flatten out the payouts as much.
So just to be fair, what you're, in other words, you get 30% versus 50 after 14 weeks. But if you hit a prize for the regular season, you could well go past the 50 and cover all your, I don't know that that's expected value, but yeah. And I'm not good enough to figure out that percentage and the chance that happens.
It's just under $8 basically, in expected value per entry on Underdog. So that's our baseline basically for drafting on Underdog's BBM, we start off with a baseline expected value just under $8. It's like $7.94 per entry on a $25 entry. The problem with that is only 10,000 of the 677,000 entries are going to realize any of that expected value. And if you think about how top heavy that already is, we have to assume that those drafts, those rosters that are winning any regular season prize are also advancing and realizing expected value for the playoff round or advancing out of their round. So the calculation isn't exactly one for one. The biggest picture here is you have a higher baseline for expected value per advance rate on DraftKings when compared to Underdog.
And it's also flatter up top, but I want to focus more on how we attack the tournaments.
Yeah.
I think you made that point really well, and I think it's something that you do need to think about. But when you sit down to do a draft and you've done your pre-draft analysis, and I'm really glad you shared it, because that is an important part of doing this whole thing. But when you sit down to do a DraftKings draft, obviously the two big differences are it's full PPR versus half PPR, and different than both FFPC and Underdog, you get bonuses for 100 yards rushing or receiving and 300 yards passing. So going into the draft, how does that big picture change the way that you draft?
Yeah, and the other difference is it's 20-round draft comparing it to Underdog. It's only 18.
Absolutely.
So we definitely have different things that kind of move this idea of optimal for us. Big picture, and this is something that you highlighted in your most recent work over at Sharp, the fact that ADPs are relatively stagnant across platforms, with the major outlier being FFPC with their tight end premium scoring. So if that's the case, there's definitely targets that you are looking to target on one platform versus another. There's definitely the rankings. And again, this is median projection, which is what drives rankings, but the rankings are going to be different on various platforms per their scoring. Yet we're seeing ADP being more or less kind of stagnant across the industry.
That was a shock to me when I went to do my article today. I mean, I had a feeling it was going to be, I'm not blind. I play on all three sites, but it was just kind of rubbing at the back of my mind, hey, I'm not really seeing differences here. And it opens up opportunities, which led to me wanting to do the article.
Yeah, for sure. And the other, I think, primary thing that we have to add into that decision-making matrix when we sit down for a draft is the fact that we have those 20 rounds to play with. And we have also, per the governing rules of the contest, the finals round, which is where most of the expected value comes from, is almost, or I guess right about 3 times as many people. So at that point, we're now talking about a large field single entry GPP style DFS contest compared to Underdog, where it would be more akin to a high dollar single entry. So we're talking about, like on DraftKings, it would be similar to the SPY, where it's the $100 single entry, but it's a fairly large field. Compared to on Underdog, we're playing what would be like the whatever the $1,000 buy-in is called. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but so the field sizes definitely play a role into roster construction decisions, into how we're leveraging week 17 correlation, all the things that we kind of have learned over the previous 3 years to approach this fleeting term of optimal, which is not going to be proven for another 200 years of best ball because the sample size per each season is 1. So we have a grand total of 3 iterations of this to kind of make these sweeping conclusions. But yeah, I'm looking to pay a lot more attention to robust week 17 correlations on DraftKings because we have that additional room. I'm looking for those discrepancies in ADP, which is the, I guess, difference between a median projection versus where their ADP is. And I'm looking to basically not waste those 2 additional picks that we get, and really, really trying to, with those final 2 picks, play a lot into that week 17 correlation, where every pick in that range is not necessarily like a blind shot in the dark, but it is a lower percentage probability chance of hitting. So if we include those picks into our week 17 correlations, our game stacks, it lowers the amount of variables that have to go right for that player to hit.
Yeah. And that's one of the old jam to win, DFS things. And, I talk about how in my article, how this playing different people on different sites so that you mix your exposure. It's smart because you're getting the best value on each site. And B, it is, it's a way to protect yourself against injury. So really paying attention to ADP. You mentioned the fact that there's 1,364 teams. I mean, that's double last year's underdog final, almost triple. And I think it's double this year's final. So for me, correlation week 17 becomes crucial because you've got 2 12-week playoffs to get, I think is it 1 of 12 or 2 of 12?
It's 1 of 12 across the board.
Yeah. But still, that's 8. You have an 8.5. Each team that makes it through has an 8.5% chance of advancing, and that's a big difference versus 16 on underdog. So but then you get 1,300 teams in the final. So all the more, I am not really focusing on correlating week 15, 16. If it happens, great. I use the spike week overlay, and I'm doing a lot more slow drafts. I just can't keep taking 45 minutes out of my life.
Yeah.
I'd rather 2-3 times a day sit down and knock out 15 or 20 slows picks. I'm doing 35 and then 10 Draftkings. I'm doing like 45 slows right now. And, it's a way to manage your ability to do things, but I'm digressing because, so with Draftkings, it's easier to get to the final, but it's harder to separate in the final. Does that change your outlook on week 17? And does it really take week 16 and 15 out of the equation for you?
For me personally, my decisions are based on the expected value and where it lies. And if you look at both of these contests, the primary contributors to expected value are week 17 and advance rate. Weeks 15 and 16 are almost negligible to the expected value puzzle. So to me, it's almost like those weeks don't exist. And I understand you have to get teams to week 17 to realize that expected value. But for me, I'll let variance kind of take the wheel at that point. I want as many unique rosters through to realize some expected value to give me that baseline. And now I am fully optimizing for week 17. And that is on any platform that has a playoff type structure.
Yeah, last year I really felt like week 16 was important. And I think that because especially when you're doing lives, when you're and you've got 30 seconds to make a pick, even with an overlay, it's really hard. And a lot of times I'll have it narrowed down and done my studying before I'm on the clock. But even still, we talk about, having less things to get right. Having less things to think about when you're on the clock is also important. So I think you and I are on the same page there. How much more or less likely are you to try and do a unique build on DK? And what are your favorite builds? So, yeah, go ahead. I think you get that.
Yeah, I'm probably more likely to do unique builds on Draftkings because I feel like the field, it just views those additional 2 picks as an excuse to draft an additional quarterback, as an excuse to draft an additional tight end, or beef up a running back position. If you look at expected value on these unique builds, you can approach optimal theory, which for underdog, we'll talk DraftKings, which for DraftKings is still 2 to 3 quarterbacks, 2 to 3 tight ends, and then basically the even spread, 5 to 7 or 6 to 8 even running backs, and then 7 to 9 wide receivers. That's kind of those guidelines that I think you call them. The field is likely in unique builds to bolster the positions that they were short on over the first 10 to 12 rounds. So for 0 running back builds, they're likely to invest heavier in those shot in the dark variants late in running backs. And for teams that basically go like, it's not really a thing, but they just neglected quarterbacks early, they're likely to leave the draft with 4. And this is just human psychology, field tendencies. So I'm much likelier to not do that. And whether that is optimal, we don't really know, but I'm just utilizing a little bit of game theory and say, well, if the field is doing this, I'm still going to leave a 0 running back draft on DraftKings with 5 or 6 running backs and not hit 7 or 8, because I just think that there can be edge there gained from the fact that the expected points, so the median projection based on where a player is taken in the draft. Obviously, there's been a lot of people that have done work in that. Hayden Winks has done a lot of work in that. Michael Leone has done a lot of work with that. Projecting median projections versus ADP or round that a player is taken. Running backs and wide receivers, running backs fall off a cliff much quicker because there's fewer of them. The problem with just comparing apples to apples is it's not really apples to apples, because the value of running back is so heavily tied to the contingency value of injuries and then the expected volume that they get from that. So all that to say, the field kind of views it as this even playing field, where the fact of the matter is median projections are higher on late round wide receivers than they are on late round running backs. And they're even higher on late round tight ends. So all of that kind of goes into my decision-making process in a draft. I'm much more likely to continue to bolster the wide receiver position late than I am the running backs or taking an additional quarterback or tight end, because those two positions, the onesie positions, the quarterbacks and tight ends, have very, very low contingency factor. So that kind of takes away the appeal of late round running backs as a comparison. And then they have a very, very steep drop off in median projections once you start getting into tier 5 and 6 guys. So for me, I'll let the field kind of approach roster construction with those additional spots, how I would term suboptimally. And I think I've identified an edge where 0 running back teams still my max is 6 running backs. Wait for quarterbacks, still my max is 3 quarterbacks. I'm never really going to take 4. Same thing, tight end. Wait for tight end rosters. I'm still only going to take 3 tight ends there. And that gives me the ability to leverage the discrepancy in median projections in the later rounds.
Gotcha. So, I mean, for me, I am trying to balance my position groups. I think that's important. And so if I'm doing a 0 running back build, I am going to have 7, 8, maybe even 9 if I feel I need it. But once I get past, let's say, the 12th, 13th round, I'm looking at stacking more correlations, unique players, different things to give me an edge. But I've seen too many times where, a couple years ago, if you didn't have 16th round Rashad Penny, during the playoff weeks, you weren't winning any money. So I do think that, I like having the guardrails that you talk about. And I'm more likely to be vanilla in that way, because I feel like I can outbuild the average guy, right?
Yeah.
I don't need, even though I need on DraftKings, and that's why I like FFPC, because I don't need a 0.5% outcome, to get a lot of money. But on Underdog and on DK, I have the ability to win more money, which I also like.
Yeah.
So I feel like what that gives me is, I feel like my knowledge of how to do best ball is like leaning my weight on someone. Like if you've ever played basketball, if you're my size, you might lean on someone, a shooter early in the game, and it doesn't matter. But late in the game, if he's been dragging your fat, up and down the court all day, he tires. So I feel like my overall knowledge of my builds and my players is better. So I don't do that. One interesting thing I thought of when I was writing my article for this week on how to handle running back differently for each site and who is the value, is that the opportunity cost on Underdog and FFPC with first round running backs, with the wide receivers just being so crazy priced, especially on Underdog, I have a hard time drafting McCaffrey and Bijan. But DraftKings, would you agree that the elite running backs have a bigger place because they give you the opportunity to hit 2 bonuses each week? Because, the guys who are in the first 4 or 5 running backs off the board all bring both running and pass receiving chops. Does that play into how you look at drafting early?
It does not. And the reason is those should be, that range of outcomes should be built into projections. And I personally am developing a range of outcomes projections, and I know they are available in other spots. I think, I forget where I've seen them, but range of outcomes projections help you visualize an array of values. And I think the field is getting better at not thinking of a very dynamic and game that has a lot of variance, such as football, through the terms of a single data point, which is projections, which are median projections. If we are able to visualize the range of outcomes and visualize, if we could play out this season infinitely, where players' ranges of outcomes different, or I guess vary, we're able to have the fact that there are only a certain amount of players that can hit double bonuses or hit bonuses regularly built into that idea. And so for me, visualizing range of outcomes helps to have that in my box of tools already and not have to force exposure to. And I'm in agreement with you, and Bijan and CMC in particular. I have as the RB2 and RB3. So when I have a guy, Austin Eckler, who's my RB1, it's much easier for me to build natural overweight exposure to a guy like him in the first round that's going towards the end of the first round, and be underweight on guys whose season-long range of outcomes does not match where they're going. I'm forcing exposure, that said, to those 2 players, and I'm trying to do so Bijan on Underdog because his play style more naturally matches the scoring format, and CMC on DraftKings for the same reason. Because
I got to interrupt. Why would I mean, Bijan has all these pass game chops.
But are they going to pass?
Well, that's the $1 million question. But
yeah.
But I do think that, when you're talking range of outcomes, I think Bijan has a legitimate range of outcomes where he catches 70 passes.
I think that's viable. And in order for Bijan to, and again, speaking to an entire season outcome, in order for Bijan to pay off his ADP, he has to have a rookie season Saquon Barkley year. Like that is paying off his ADP. So the fact that he's a rookie, the fact that he's on an offense that has Tyler Algier where he could be involved. Look at when Saquon was drafted, and they had nobody on the roster behind Saquon. It was like we were throwing all of our eggs into his basket. Not necessarily the case for Atlanta. They have guys who can come in and be change of pace backs. So that's notwithstanding that discussion. I'm trying to get more exposure to Bijan on Underdog because the touchdown expectancy is a little bit higher, and touchdowns are actually less important on DraftKings, being full PPR and being the having the bonuses thrown in. So that is kind of what goes into that equation for me. And then CMC basically flipped that because of the pass catching chops, and he's a little bit more established role, and it's been proven, all that stuff. But closing the loop on that discussion, the fact that I don't want to like say bearish on those two guys, but the fact that their ranges of outcomes do not necessarily align with their ADP for the entire season. The counterpoint to that is that they have elite single week expectations or ranges of outcomes. They have some of the higher ceilings per week than any other running back in the league. So that is highly important for when we start getting to the playoff rounds, where you can mask the fact that their season-long expectation, or they didn't match their season-long expectation per ADP through roster construction, through all these other tools that we have by playing best ball. And now you have a player with potentially a lower pass-through rate that still has elite ceiling for the playoff round. So I'm forcing some for those reasons, and that's where I'm doing it for those individual guys.
Gotcha. Yeah, it just occurred to me. One other thing that kind of occurred to me as I studied my article on the various running backs is if you talked about this already. Guys, if one guy's on the eighth running back on one site, he's not the 12th running back on another site. He might be the 10th or the 9th. You really have a tight range, of guys, so that it really does, like a Damien Pierce, going in the 6th round on Underdog. I really like him. I think he's a talented guy. There's a case to be made that's a better offense this year, right? On DraftKings, where he's very unlikely to catch a lot of passes, I am not as interested. Who are some of the guys that you're more interested in at the running back position on DraftKings, and why?
Yeah, guys like Rachaad White, guys like Antonio Gibson, guys that have already an established role in their offense, and they're like pass catching specialist plus. So like we would expect Rachaad White is going to get his 12 to 15, maybe even carries per game. A guy like Antonio Gibson might be in the 8 to 10 carry per game, but their expectation is inflated due to their pass game work. So it's not like I'm targeting only pass catching backs, and it's not like I'm jumping multiple tiers to secure pass catching guys. I'm targeting guys that have what I call like a pass catching plus role, change of pace role plus pass catching role. So those are two primary examples on a site like Underdog. And I know this is DraftKings centric, but on a site like Underdog, where pretty much around the industry, you see backfield tandems have their ADPs converging. So the two primary examples are Denver and Washington, where Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson.
And Buffalo,
yeah.
Buffalo's my favorite stack cuff this year.
Yeah, so on those three backfields, we'll say, their ADPs of the two primary players are converging, and it didn't start that way. So like on Underdog early, I was targeting Antonio Gibson fairly heavily, and I had almost zero Brian Robinson. Now that they are within a round of each other in ADP, my stance is completely flipped. I've drafted almost 0 Antonio Gibson over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm really, really bolstering Brian Robinson. Same thing for Buffalo, where Damien Harris is creeping up. There's a larger ADP spread in that example compared to, oh God, what was the other example I gave? Washington and now I'm drawing a blank. Whatever.
Oh,
the other,
man.
oh Jesus, that's gone. It's gone forever, man.
No, it's not. I'm going to find it. I heard you.
Oh, Denver.
Yes.
Denver.
And see, for me, a couple when this whole thing started post-draft, I was so in on Samaje Perine, especially in full PPR, right? He was going 11th, 12th round, and now he's getting closer to Javonte Williams. And what makes no sense, and ADP tends to overall be very intelligent, but not till after training camp, I find. Because now there's a lot more projecting, you know what I mean, of what the role will be. Once camp starts, we start getting less subjective information and more fact-based observation. So-and-so is running first, so-and-so is running second, and I feel like the news on Javonte Williams has actually been pretty positive. In early best ball, he was 6th, 7th round. Now, mid 9th, I certainly am willing to consider him a guy to mix in.
Yeah. So to theoretically tie all that together, the fact that ADPs are relatively stagnant across multiple platforms, and the fact that we have these situations with converging ADPs, I'm able to pick and choose where I draft and when I draft. So we have to consider our entire portfolio when we're doing this. It's much bigger than the lens of like one individual draft on one particular site, because I break up I call the entire time that we can draft these contests, I call that my draft cycle. I break up that entire draft cycle into individual draft windows that are married to something that you brought up in news cycles. So for me, I break up my overall draft cycle into draft window 1, which is after the NFL draft into the beginning of preseason camp. So I kind of disregard all this nebulous reporting that comes out in OTAs. My second draft window is from the start of preseason camp to the start of the preseason. And my third draft window is preseason to the start of the regular season.
Correct.
And then
the strategies are different for all three.
Yeah. So then I look at like the overall landscape of the different platforms, and Draftkings is notoriously, we'll say softer, but it's notoriously not as cutthroat as FFPC and as Underdog. So because the variance and the ADPs also change in those varying draft windows, I attack Underdog heavily right after, like right when the contest opened. I think I hit 52 BBMs within the first 3 or 4 days that contest was open. And since then, I've sat on my hands and I've been just playing. If I'm playing on Underdog, it's all these snapshot contests, the puppy, the Pomeranians, Poodle. Whatever. Yeah, the poodles, all those that all
love all those. Love all those little contests that I love being able to, I'm already spending an ungodly amount of money on fantasy football.
Yeah.
And any chance I get to do 50 drafts for $250, in a 2-week period. And what I also like doing is I like doing those mostly slow, because everyone else, here's an advanced kind of way to look at it. Everyone doing fast drafts is getting a snapshot of ADP within, the puppy closes within a week normally, 10 days.
Yeah.
If you do slows, after 10 days, you might be in the 6th round. right? If you do 50 drafts, I bet, a good 20% of them are still in single digits, if not more. I feel like you get a different advantage in trying to differentiate, Mark.
Yeah, and the edge of doing that, I talk about the Puppy One. The Puppy One released prior to the NFL schedule released. So how were people? And there's ways I was trying to target divisions and try and correlate for Week 17, but that contest filled, or I guess that contest approached about 80% full, like 1 or 2 days after the NFL schedule was released. So I drafted like 23, I think, Puppy Ones prior to the NFL schedule released. And then I late reg max entered 127 slow drafts when the contest was 80% full, because now you have access to all this additional information that the rest of the field didn't. And so I think at one time I had 167 slow drafts on Underdog going, 127.
That's insane.
127 puppies, and then 20 poodles and 20 poodle twos that were all going at the same time. And some of those now are finishing to where I'm starting to get a little.
Yeah,
less.
I still got poodles and puppies.
Yeah,
the original puppy. Let me ask you another.
Well, hold on. I got one more point to close
Sure.
up that. So in knowing that and in breaking up the draft window, the draft cycle into individual windows, now I know that I'm taking my pause on Underdog. Now I go and hit DraftKings hard. So now I'm starting to ramp up my DraftKings drafting, because the variance versus ADP versus skill level that is on DraftKings is different than it is on Underdog. So I wanted maximum exposure to variance early on Underdog, because my general observation of the field was drafting when the contest opened as if it were in August. So I wanted to leverage that variance and take some unique approaches on Underdog. Whereas on DraftKings, it's a lot more flat. You don't see as many extremes. So now I can take my play over to DraftKings, where I'm taking this like pause. And for the next 4 weeks until the start of camp, I can start hammering those edges on DraftKings, where I feel like the field is a lot slower to react to major news, to general roster construction, to optimal theory, to all these things, because they have access to a much larger player pool of DFS players, because they were an established DFS platform.
Any 2-down pounder. So with DraftKings, right, it's really an interesting thing, right? So the 2-down pounders are more valuable on Underdog, right? Because it's half PPR. But the 2-down pounders who get a lot of volume also have a very good, like a Derrick Henry. He's in line for that 100-point bonus almost every week. Who are some of your favorite 2-down guys on DraftKings where you normally wouldn't think to start, to take 2-down guys? But so like I'm less likely to take a Brian Robinson on DraftKings, but I'm happy to take him on Underdog, where a guy like Damian Pierce, who I mentioned, I think he becomes interesting on DraftKings possibly, even though I said something earlier.
Yeah, it's the guys that can pierce the bonus and score touchdowns. So like last season would have been, I wasn't on him at all, but like Jamal Williams, obviously, he was never in threatening the bonus, but he was getting in the end zone because the Lions made it their goal in life to get tackled at the 1-yard line and just provide him with all these touchdowns. But those guys that have,
I was 20+% on him last year.
I missed hard.
And I've gotten that situation right 2 years in a row. The year before, I was heavy Swift in the early 4th, and I was passing on Jamal Williams in the 11th. And last year, I mean, it was like Swift was early 2nd. Jamal Williams was like 16th round.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, he was, half PPR. He was he was like almost a 25% guy for me.
Yeah. So That's basically what I'm looking for. Is I'm looking for guys that can threaten the 100-yard bonus, and I'm looking for guys that can score touchdowns. So Brian Robinson does fit that mold for me. I would have no problem targeting him on DraftKings. And again, that goes into a lot of the discussion that we already had as well. Cam Akers, it's basically Cam Akers and nobody else behind him. He's a guy that I've been targeting on both platforms for that touchdown equity. Other guys like the Miami backfield.
I'm very low on him, and I was just looking at it today saying I'm 3% on him, and that's too low.
Cam Akers?
Yeah.
Oh, dude. I think I'm 35% through my first 250 drafts. I went large.
I don't, I've been hitting that range where he goes for quarterback. If one of the mid-tier guys slips, or like Dak and Watson when Dak was going that early, and the wide receivers really fall off after like the 10th, 11th round. So I feel like a guy, but I do like Akers. I think it's a mistake. I want to get to a couple other of these questions before we run out of time. Quarterback is an interesting discussion as it relates to running quarterbacks who in general are less likely to hit the 300-yard bonus. But if they're really talented, they do give you the chance to get the 100-yard bonus with their legs. How is your quarterback strategy different on DraftKings from Underdog?
Almost not at all. And I'll tell you why. I did a study this offseason for a 33rd team that wanted to find out the importance of touchdowns to each position in fantasy. And what I found was touchdowns, regardless of whether they come via pass or via on the ground, were most correlated to fantasy production at the quarterback position. So the overall importance of season-long projections and individual.
Yeah, because I'm sorry to interrupt, but because even though they're 4 points instead of 6, they get 3 or 4 of them. They can get 3 or 4 of them on a regular basis. So you throw for 3 touchdowns, that's 12 points. That's a lot less unusual than a running back or wide receiver getting 2 to get you those same 12 points.
Yeah, I mean, let's compare 2021 Matthew Stafford, who threw for 41 touchdowns, to 2022 Justin Fields. They ended the season about the same fantasy production in those respective years. And Matthew Stafford is statuesque. He's not running. He's not mobile at all. He's not scoring rushing touchdowns. So it almost doesn't matter where the touchdowns are coming from, but we need to be scoring touchdowns at the quarterback position. And so that kind of dictates my overall governing strategy at the quarterback position, targeting offenses that we expect to score more touchdowns than last year. I mentioned one of them, Matthew Stafford, Russell Wilson, Tua Tagovailoa, these guys that are being basically withheld from, or their ADPs are being suppressed because of uncertainty, because of recency bias, because of all these things. Like the psychology that goes into clicking a button, yet they're expected to score touchdowns. And that's kind of what governs who I'm targeting at quarterback this year. So obviously the elite 5, I'll call them the elite 6, maybe, quarterbacks are elite, not because they have rushing, not because of this and that. They're elite because they score touchdowns. So it's Patrick Mahomes, it's Jalen Hurts, it's Joe Burrow, it's Justin Herbert, and then Josh Allen. That's and then maybe Lamar Jackson. Those are the quarterbacks that have the elite touchdown potential. And then after that, we start breaking them down into tiers, and that middle tier of you mentioned Dak Prescott. He's probably in that nebulous range for me personally, because of the fact that potentially his touchdown rate decreases this year. Whereas a guy like
although at least as of now, Zeke Elliott isn't there, which would lead you to believe that they're going to have to score touchdowns through the air more in the red zone.
Yeah, so that's probably a nod for me personally to their expected offensive efficiency, their drive success rate, their offense's efficiency metrics. Another thing that came out of my study in touchdowns is basically across the board, whether it's wide receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends, 80% plus of the touchdowns that are scored in the NFL are scored within the red zone. So yes, wide receivers are the player most likely to provide those outliers scoring from deeper parts of the field. So we have to weigh like an offense's expected efficiency and ability to sustain drives to get into the red zone to score touchdowns. So that's probably where my singling out Dak came from there. Probably wasn't the perfect example, but I wanted to highlight the discrepancy in ADP from guys like we talked about, Russ Wilson, Matthew Stafford is egregious right now, versus the guys in that kind of sub-tier 3 quarterback range.
Yeah, for me, I am much more willing to go 3 quarterbacks late, right?
Yeah.
And they can be statues, because if I have 3 shots at the $300 bonus each week, I have a really good chance of getting that, right? And I am even, it's weird to me that wide receivers are more valuable on Underdog than DraftKings from a ADP perspective. But wide receivers, because of that ability to get the elite guys to get that 100-yard bonus, I'm much more likely to take wide receivers early than I am on Underdog. Although I think you have to play the game with both right now. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think theoretically there's probably a lot more layers that go into that because of the fact that ADP is static. If ADP were dynamic per platform right now, I would be much more willing to buy into that from a theoretical perspective because of the ADP difference. But the fact that there's not one right now, really, it kind of is just like you can do a lot of the same things that you're doing on Underdog on DraftKings, with the major difference being basically the expanded rosters to 20.
Yeah. So, I mean, all right. So right before we get to that question, though, real quick, elite tight end. Are you more likely to go elite tight end on DraftKings?
I am. I'm more likely, and I'm more likely to double up early.
Interesting. Yeah, because that definitely will differentiate you. I think elite tight ends, because there's only a few guys who can get you that 100-yard bonus. I think that elite tight ends, and I'm much more willing to, to me, tight end, the onesie positions are a little bit of a seesaw. I find that if you take both, the seesaw ends up being flat, and you don't want that. So I tend to have it more like a seesaw, where I'm either taking my real early quarterback or my real early tight end. Once in a while, I'll do both, especially to make a stack. But again, with the ability to take 3 late quarterbacks and have it add up to what these elite quarterbacks give you on Underdog. The other thing to consider is, because it's half PPR, quarterback scoring is a bigger part of the total. So to separate with one of the top guys is important. So and we both agree on elite tight end. And last thing, I know you've touched on it a little bit, but I think people don't really make enough out of rounds 19 and 20. As far as I look at it as, yes, it is a place where you can patch weak parts of your team, but it's also a place where you can go for home runs. Semi-retired player, like, I'm not doing that with Brady and Gronk this year, but I did it last year.
Yeah,
and then Brady came back, right, with early best ball. Yeah. I think that, and then, I will go way down the list looking for a correlation in the 19. I'm not taking the guys who are in the 19th, 18th, 19th, 20th round tend to be there for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're lacking sincere opportunity. So all the more I'm looking for a young, talented player who has a correlation. A guy like Puka, is it Nasua?
Yeah.
Your thoughts on how to handle those last two rounds?
I'm primarily targeting Z-type wide receivers with an inflated A-dot, and I'm primarily trying to target ambiguity and unknown.
Say that again.
I'm primarily trying to target Z-type wide receivers, so the wide receivers that are fast with high A-dots, these guys that are used as field stretchers, as safety manipulators. Guys that jump out off the page. Van Jefferson was available in the 18th round on Underdog to start the season, was hammering him. Darius Slayton is currently still going in that range, and I'd expect him to at least start the season in that role.
Hoping for that long touchdown when you
Yeah. So the guys, and I'm weighing the week 17 correlation heavier in that, not heavier, but I'm trying to add that into the decision process for those late picks. So I'm not just like taking blind stabs at guys, and if they work out, they great, and if they don't, fine. People just view those picks as like a like luxury picks. It's like make them work
or just as a way to differentiate for the sake of differentiating.
Yeah.
And to me, thinking that you've differentiated your lineup enough because your 19th round pick is somebody who nobody is drafting, I think is, if that thought even enters your mind, I think you're missing the larger points of what it takes to be a good best ball player. I'm not saying you never take guys like that, but if it's a guy that is going undrafted in a lot of the drafts, I'm only going to take him if I think he's a talented young player who, if he gets the opportunity, could do something with it, and he's correlated, right? So I'm therefore giving myself 3 or 4 different shots at getting something out of a guy who the field thinks isn't going to be anything, or he wouldn't be going. He wouldn't not be getting drafted all the time, Mark.
Yeah, and if you break down the round that a player is drafted and marry it with their total number of expected usable weeks, the number for rounds 19 and 20 guys is 1 to 3 usable weeks. I'm spreading exposure via game environment in how I attack those rounds to lower the number of variables that have to go right in order for one of those spike weeks to happen in week 15 or 16 or 17, where it matters the most. And that's where I think the field is just basically rolling the dice, and they're putting all their money on snake eyes at the craps table and saying, I'm taking 1 to 30 or 30 to 1 odds on this one roll. It's like, well, you can do things to lower those variables and bring it down closer to getting the odds for, say, a double 8 or a double 4, a hard 8, to where you're lowering the variables that have to go right for that particular dice roll in order to get the usable weeks when they matter the most. And approaching it in that way is very different from a cumulative points league like on Drafters, where the shotgun approach to hitting a outlier performer is much more pertinent than it is to a playoff contest, where you need a 5% outcome over the sample size of 1 week. And lowering those variables, similar to a DFS strategy, and attacking it through a game environment or a game stack or a team stack, it just lowers the number of things that have to go right for your roster to find success.
I agree. That's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. We've talked about the puppy. I think it's about 45%, the recent puppy full. So I'm going to have to add more of those. Mark, thank you so much for coming on, and we will see you folks next week. Check out Mark on one of his 18 jobs. Thank you, folks.
Thanks.